This nightmare unfolded on Aeroflot Flight 821, where a drunken pilot endangered the lives of everyone on board. How did such a serious mistake happen? This incident raises urgent questions about aviation safety and oversight. What went wrong, and what lessons can we learn to prevent similar situations in the future? Join us as we uncover the shocking details behind this flight and explore the crucial changes needed to ensure the safety of all passengers in the sky. On the night of September 14, 2008, an Aeroflot Boeing 737-505 with 88 people on board was on its way to Perm, a city in the mountains. The plane was going down very quickly, at a very steep angle of attack. The incident occurred at Sheremetyevo International Airport in Moscow, Russia, on September 14, 2008. At 1:30 a.m., Aeroflot North is a branch of Aeroflot Airlines, and its commercial planes were busy doing last-minute checks to get ready for a new trip. Flight Su-821 was supposed to go from Sheremetyevo International Airport in Moscow to Perm, a Russian city on the Kama River. The flight was supposed to take more than 2 hours. A Boeing 737-505, which is the smallest model in the Boeing 737 Classic series, was used for today's flight. It was a passenger jet with 2 engines, both CFM International CFM56-3 engines. The Boeing 737-505, which is the smallest plane in the 737 series, is about 101.71 feet long. It stands 36.42 feet tall and has wings that spread 94.82 feet wide. It has enough space for up to 140 people. In Ximen, Fujian Province, China, this plane served for 13 years. After selling and leasing it several times, Aeroflot leased it in early 2008 to expand and enhance its fleet. There were a total of 44,533 flight hours and 35,104 flight cycles on this Boeing. At this point, it was 16 years old, which is pretty old for a passenger jet. Early on, the 6 Flight 821 crew members showed up to get medical checks and get ready for their jobs. Soon after, the rest of the crew showed up, and everyone was ready to start the trip to beautiful Perm. 2 very experienced pilots, known to have some of the best crews at Aeroflot Nord, were in charge of the plane today. Rodion Mihailovich Medvedev was the captain. He was 34 years old and had flown 3,689 hours, including 1,190 hours on a Boeing 737 and 452 hours as a captain. Alaberdin, Rustam Rafalovic, was the co-pilot. He was 43 years old. He'd had 8,710 hours of flight time, but only 219 hours on the Boeing 737. During their careers, the crew mostly flew high-end Soviet planes like the Antonov An-2 and Tupolev Tu-134. Despite their prior flight experience, they had only recently received permission to operate the Boeing 737. The crew moved right away to stand 2-2, where the plane was parked, after the health check, to start getting ready for the flight. The weather was looked at by the pilots and found to be good for flying. It was supposed to rain and fog where they were going, but nothing bad enough to be really worried about. The Su-821 is a regular flight for people. Besides the 3 people who canceled the flight, there were 82 other people on board today. A good number of them were Russian. Some of the people there were also from other countries, like Azerbaijan, Ukraine, and the United States. A famous person was on board, Russian Colonel Gendy Trashev, who works as an advisor to President Dmitry Medvedev. Everyone was excited about the trip, but no one knew that something terrible was going to happen in the sky over Russia. The crew did a few last checks before the flight to get ready for the trip. The plane would be flown by the co-pilot, and the captain would be in charge of the whole flight. Rustam Rafalovic Alaberdin, the co-pilot, started setting up the cockpit as soon as he took the main seat. You might not know this. When a Boeing 737 is being set up, the Inertial Reference System, IRS, must be aligned using laser gyros and accelerometers to keep track of the plane's position after it enters its initial location. These gyros, on the other hand, tend to drift and are only accurate for short periods of time. They need help from other navigation systems. These days, GPS takes care of this for modern planes. If the plane doesn't have GPS, it has to cross-check its position or use radio waves from VOR or DME navigation devices to get the latest information on its location. The issue with this route was that there weren't any nearby stations to use. This meant that over time, the IRS, which was the main system used to update the navigation screen with the plane's location, would become less accurate. The co-pilot also entered the wrong initial coordinates, which caused the IRS to be off by 1 nautical mile from the start. Even so, the map drift on the navigation screen wasn't seen as a big deal. Sitting next to him, Captain Rodion looked over the plane's logs. They gave me a technical log that showed that the autothrottle worked. The captain checked again and saw that it wasn't turned off. Since there were no technicians around to ask, he thought it was still functional. Another operational item in the technical log was the plane's TCAS system. However, they were allowed to fly without it, so this wasn't a big deal. At 3 a.m., at the right time for the area, the captain sent a routine message to the cabin. Some passengers who were paying attention thought the captain's voice sounded a little off, and they looked at each other with doubt. The noise level rose, but just as the plane was about to take off, the flight attendants quickly calmed down one of the passengers. But the suspicion turned out to be very true. A few hours before boarding, Captain Rodion had been drinking a lot with friends while celebrating the birth of his child. Still, he got past the medical room. No one had a reason to report or question what was going on. At 3:06 a.m., 6 minutes later, the plane was given permission to take off. The plane did what it was told to do. At first, the plane moved slowly, but then it sped up and quickly reached the ski needed for takeoff. The engines got louder as the plane sped up, and in a few seconds, it took off from the ground. As the plane slowly rose in the sky, it broke through the clouds and into the open space. The plane reached its flight level of 9,100 meters at 3:30 a.m. According to air traffic control, that's the same as 29,855 feet. The plane's automatic flight and navigation control system, FMC, updated its location based on Moscow's VOR as soon as it took off. The IRS position, on the other hand, stayed wrong and kept drifting by about 1 to 2 nautical miles per hour. This was just an update on the navigation screen. It was also found that the autothrottle had been turned on just before takeoff, even though it wasn't supposed to be. You might also be interested to know that at that time, all Russian aviation references still used meters as the main unit instead of feet, which is how most airlines around the world do it. Going forward, please continue to use meters for the rest of the trip. The plane stayed at a steady height of 9,100 meters for an hour into the flight. It was very quiet in the cockpit, and there was a slight tension in the air. When the plane was about 110 nautical miles from Perm International Airport, the crew started to talk about where they were going. The flight's captain and co-pilot then set the local QFE. QFE is a pressure unit that is used in the altimeter system of the plane. The QFE value tells the pilot what the plane's actual altitude is in relation to the airport. This makes sure that the pilot has accurate altitude readings during the flight for safety and accurate navigation. Co-pilot Rustam tried to load the route and approach into the flight management computer, FMC, at the same time but couldn't find them in memory. So, he had to set up the waypoints by hand. But it looked like Rustam didn't fully understand how the program in the FMC worked and needed a lot of help from the captain. Because this task took longer than planned, the crew didn't have time to talk about the approach or give the descent briefing. This was a significant error, as the approach briefing not only ensured proper setup, but also outlined an approach plan for both pilots to comprehend. It was 4:40 a.m. when the Boeing 737 started to get close to Perm's airspace. The crew got some bad news. The weather was terrible. It was foggy and light rain all the time. The top of the clouds was about 240 meters high. As a result, the pilots would depend on help from local air traffic control to land. The captain then called ATC to ask to go down. After the call, SUA-21 was told to go down 5,100 meters and then 4,500 meters. Setting the authorized altitude on the mode control panel was done by the co-pilot without telling the captain, and the captain did not check the altitude either. This was yet another serious breach of flight rules. Also, Captain Rodion told the co-pilot to handle the radio, which was the job of the supervisor. This meant that the captain broke a basic rule about flying a Boeing 737, staying within your areas of responsibility. Because of this, co-pilot Rustam had a lot more work to do. When it was 4:46 a.m., the captain went through the cabin to wake up the people who were still sleeping. The landing excited most of the passengers who woke up. Even though they were worried at first, they thought the trip would end well. But there were more problems on the way. At 4:49 a.m., the co-pilot called ATC. He read the Mendeleevo 4 Alpha route wrong because he had set it up in the flight management computer. He was told off right away by ATC, but the co-pilot didn't seem to understand what was going on and was confused. He even asked the captain what was different about Bravo. The flight management system, FMS, already had a shorter procedure set up when they got ready to approach the runway. The crew had to reset and do extra things in order to fly the new route. The first place they had to go was to the end of runway 3. Then they had to go to the locator between 7.05 px and turn around to approach ILS runway 21. The crew's plan, on the other hand, was much easier. They just had to fly straight to a fixed point and then turn towards the ILS. This change was made because Lufthansa's Airbus A319 was getting ready to take off on the runway. It was first cleared for runway 03, but because of tailwinds that were not helping, it was moved to runway 21. The new route made it farther between when the Airbus A319 took off and when the SU A21 landed. At 4:50 a.m., ATC told the crew about the change in the arrival route. This was a hard way to explain why the crew was there, and it seemed to make things even more confusing for them. Also, a problem that persisted in most Russian airlines was that many pilots spoke English very badly. In the past, they usually had 3 to 4 people in the cockpit, including a flight engineer who took care of technical issues. So, when they switched to American planes, they had trouble with standard operating procedures and system instructions. Because the captain was getting angry, he called ATC. For the last question, the captain asked, "Adjust to what point?" "You should adjust to the PX beacon," and ATC replied. But ATC didn't say whether this was in line with the approved arrival route or going straight to the PX beacon. Things were getting pretty confusing in the cockpit, and the way ATC talked to them didn't help. From what they said about tailwinds, it looked like the pilots, especially the co-pilot, thought they were okay to land on runway 03 instead of runway 21. The co-pilot said this several times in the next few minutes, but neither pilot asked ATC which runway they were going to land on. After the call, the captain chose to stay on heading 085 as shown on the MH4A chart for a while longer. He then changed to heading 108. From this point on, the captain started to get very angry. Later, listening to his voice on the cockpit recorder showed that he may have been feeling more and more stressed as the flight went on. As they got closer to Perm, the pilots were still not sure about the landing runway. But it looked like the captain thought it might be ILS runway 21 and put that information into the flight management system, FMS, without telling the co-pilot. Right now, the FMC found a difference of up to 4.5 kilometers in the plane's current location because the co-pilot entered the wrong initial coordinates. The plane's actual flight path was a little different from what was shown on the navigation screen, but the pilots didn't notice. Do you remember the IRS drift I talked about before? As the plane got closer to its destination, the drift got bigger, reaching about 4.5 kilometers. This meant that the plane's navigation screen showed a position that was about 4.5 kilometers northeast of where it actually was. On the ground, the air traffic controller saw that the plane wasn't going where he told it to go. But he only thought that the SU-821 crew was trying to keep a safe distance from the Airbus and that they would soon make the necessary changes. The plane could now keep going down until it reached 2,700 meters and then wait for more instructions. The pilots set the throttles to idle and used the level change mode to go down. Once the plane got to the right height, the auto throttle started moving the throttles forward to keep the speed up. Now, the throttles were moved in different directions to make the thrust even. But because the auto throttle couldn't change right away, there was an uneven thrust, which made the rudder move to keep the plane balanced. While they talked about the next turn, the pilots didn't notice this. The captain thought that they would be told to turn left to line up with the final approach for ILS. While this was going on, the co-pilot was planning a right turn to fly the other way, since they were still too high to start the ILS approach. ATC interrupted the conversation, but the air traffic controller didn't make it clear which runway they were going to land on. They may have thought the crew already knew. The captain at SUA-21 was sure that ATC meant runway 21, but the co-pilot still thought it was a right turn for runway 3. Things didn't get better after that. The flight management computer, FMC, which Captain Rodion had set to fly straight to the end of runway 21, was still in LNAV navigation mode, which caused another problem. This meant that the crew should start turning right before ATC told them to. The plane tried to reach this point but couldn't because it was going too fast, about 220 knots, so it turned left to get back to this point. Because he didn't know about the captain's programming, this made the co-pilot feel lost and scared. This is not something a pilot should say at all. Just think about how shocked the people on board would be if they heard those words from the pilots. The captain then told the co-pilot to turn on the autopilot's heading select mode, which was the right thing to do at that time. As they kept going down, he also told the co-pilot to turn right to head 030 to get into the opposite final segment. 45 seconds after 5 a.m., the plane finally became stable on a lateral path. It was then told to keep going down to 600 meters. 1 hour after the first out, the crew finally knew which runway they would be landing on. Runway 21 was the only one with an ILS approach at Perm. But things were just getting worse for SU at 21. Unknown to him, the co-pilot pressed the trim control switch on his yoke by accident, which turned on the autopilot. At the same time, the captain wasn't keeping an eye on the plane's status. He was turning on the navigation and VORLOC approach modes again. The captain didn't yell, "Speed up," until he looked down and saw that the speed was too slow. Co-pilot Rustam, who was already very tense, was startled and put in almost full thrust again, which made the plane pitch up. They went up 300 meters more than they needed to 900 meters, and ATC could see this. The plane didn't go down as the captain said it would. In fact, it went up to 1,200 meters at 5:07 a.m. The air traffic controller saw that the plane could no longer land where it was. To go around in a circle, he told them to turn right and go down 600 meters. The captain was very angry at this point because he just wanted to land quickly. From this point on, the captain lost control of his actions, and later voice analysis showed that he may have been under a lot of stress. Then he spent the next minute trying to persuade ATC that they should be able to keep landing without a second approach, which was not possible at that point. And while the captain was trying to get in touch with ATC to make his request, he lost control of the ship by accident. This made the plane bank 0.5 degrees to the right and then up to 5 degrees to the right, which is more than Boeing's limit of 4 to 5 degrees. When the bank angle warning sound went off, co-pilot Rustam knew right away what was wrong. Even though the co-pilot tried to keep the plane stable, this was his main flaw. Remember that the planes the crew is familiar with, like the Tupolev Tu, 134 and Antonov Tu, are pretty stable and only have 1 or 2 engines very close to each other. The Boeing, on the other hand, was very different. It was also said that this co-pilot wasn't good at dealing with engine problems. He often got stressed when flying the plane when one engine stopped working, which is what was happening on that plane at that very moment. The loud fights in the cockpit could be heard over the radio, which made the air traffic controller very suspicious. He told the pilot again what to do. Over the next few minutes, the co-pilot looked like he was giving up on flying the plane because he couldn't do it. When the plane's bank angle reached 3 degrees to the left and its speed started to slow down, the co-pilot only said that the captain seemed surprised, even though he shouldn't have been since the plane had been moving all over the place for minutes. Even so, Captain Rodion Mihailovich Medvedev stepped in to handle the emergency. He took charge of the plane and turned it to the left. This raised the bank angle right away to 7 to 6 degrees. When the co-pilot sensed danger, he or she yelled out loud. But the captain was so confused that he couldn't control the yoke, which made things worse for the plane. At 5:09 a.m., the Boeing 737 lost all control, banked sharply to the left, and began to fall at 250 knots. The plane crashed on the Trans-Siberian Railway outside of Perm at 5:10 a.m. local time, 200 meters from the closest homes. With engine parts lying all over the road and other debris, tons of fuel are burned very quickly. There are 88 people on board who die. Right away, firefighters and local rescue teams arrive to look into what happened and take care of the scene. The investigation is currently underway to determine the cause of the accident. People and the media were most interested in why the plane lost control, if there were any signs of terrorism, and who would be responsible for this terrible event. At first, some witnesses said the plane's engine caught fire at 1,000 meters, 4 degrees below the point where it crashed. Because there was a high-level official on board, There was also talk that the plane had been attacked by terrorists or a missile. But Igor Levitin, the Minister of Transport, quickly said that there were no signs of explosives at the crash site. He didn't believe the earlier claims that the plane was rigged with explosives or that the crash was caused by a terrorist attack. Officials from Aeroflot also told the media that their 16-year-old Boeing had no problems during its most recent inspection earlier this year. The first clues were found using the data that was taken from the black boxes and flight recordings. First, the plane's problem wasn't caused by a technical glitch. The engines didn't catch fire and kept running until they hit the ground. Second, tests said the captain's blood alcohol level was between 0.05% and 0.11% ABV, which proved he had been drinking only a few hours before the flight. The captain talked about it for about 15 hours before the Su-821 flight, which was more than what was needed. But in the 3 days before, he had repeatedly flown long overnight flights while severely violating minimum rest requirements, which made him tired all over. Also, shocking secrets were found out during a background check. The captain learned how to fly a Boeing 737 in the U.S., but for some reason, no records of the training were kept. There were even rumors that the two pilots' certificates were fake, and no one knows how they got through the checks. When the investigation went deeper, another shocking discovery was made. The flight's captain didn't have many training records, and he also spoke English very badly. It was said that his English level was good enough, but not good enough for international flights, ICAO Level 2 out of 6 levels. Even so, this level was still a lot better than co-pilot Rustam's. The crew probably couldn't fully understand the English in the flight manual, which means the two pilots had to rely on their own knowledge to fly the plane. The final report from the investigation found that the accident was mostly caused by the crew, especially the captain, losing their sense of where they were while flying the plane down. The plane went over its bank angle limit, rolled, and quickly fell. Furthermore, the crew lacked proper training to identify and utilize Western technical indicators, particularly those from Boeing. In addition, the airline had major management and operational problems with their fleet and resources. The captain worked even though he was worn out from drinking and not getting enough rest.